Currently a Ohio rep, for the Huron County and then also the townships. And so I thought he'd just give us and he's running again, of course, but there's no opponent. And so I hope he'd give us a little update. Thank you very much.
Thank you. First, I appreciate the invitation to be here this morning and talk a little bit about what's happened in my almost 15 months of being immersed into a whole new life for at least myself and our family. I have 5 committees that I serve on, and the area of expertise that I have the most knowledge of would certainly relate around those committees, but I have been very involved with PUC in the last half a dozen months, which gets into energy to a large degree. I will talk a little bit at the end and certainly take any questions on and see probably the most active issue in Columbus at the moment is House Bill 512. I read an article or an email sent out by Kirsten this morning with Sarah Fowler's advice on what to do, and I will get to that maybe towards the end and be happy to answer any questions. I can tell you, at least at this point, you can just say, don't bother calling our office. We're against it completely. Save your calls and resources and I will give you a couple suggestions, and those have already been given in some form in written emails of where best to make that difference, and I'll tell you a little bit of what I know from the inside track of that issue, how it came about, why it's where it's at, why it's being, in my opinion, fast-tracked through the process. But let me back up a little bit and talk about 4 or 5 bills that we've introduced in this first GA. The first bill that we introduced was House Bill 168, which currently sits in, has been voted out of committee in the Senate. House Bill 168 will allow not-for-profit cemeteries to apply for a grant of up to, the grant fund is $100,000 to $125,000. It is funded by a burial permit fee, $1 in the future of which is not an addition or a raise of that price. Currently, a burial permit fee costs $3. $1 of that in the future will be, if this legislation becomes law, will be earmarked for cemetery improvements. We have a lot of townships in the state. There are over 2,400 not-for-profit cemeteries in the state of Ohio. As you know, local government funds have been cut to the bone over the last 8-10 years through the Kasich administration, and this is one small way to try and make a difference. It improves cemetery law. It improves pre-need cemetery or pre-need burial issues that needed to be addressed in terms of making sure that those are adequately safeguarded, to make sure that unscrupulous people don't somehow abscond with those funds. So there's a lot to this, but the bulk of it is the idea that individual townships would have the ability to ask for grant applications to maybe fix headstones or fix a fence or fix a road. It's not for general maintenance. It's not for the ability to come in and just do snow removal or lawn mowing. It's more for improvements. So we think it's a good bill. It was bipartisan support out of local government. I believe there was probably 1 or 2 no votes. I'm not even sure. It might have been unanimous out of the House vote. It went over to the Senate, went through committee, was unanimous vote out of the committee and Senate. It is now, should go to the floor next week, and everything would indicate that bill will pass out of the Senate. So that will be our first bill after almost a year that will actually make it to the governor's desk for a signature. So we're happy to have that happen. A second bill that is of lesser significance, but just as important to the people it's involved with, and that is a young man came to us from Avon, Brandon Toll, who is wants to get his Eagle Scout, and the way he asked to do that is he came to our office and said, I would like to create a bill that would create a ceremony for the retirement of the Ohio flag. Of course, we have retirement ceremonies in law for the federal flag. His goal was to, as part of his project, to create a retirement ceremony for the Ohio flag. So we worked with him. Some of the language in that bill is his wording. It has passed out of the House and is currently over in the Senate in committee. Our goal is to get this done by the end of the year, because in order for him to get his Eagle Scout, he has to, so I said, there's a little pressure on you and us. But I think everybody's in agreement. It was a good bill. It voted unanimously out of the House, unanimously off the floor also, and it sits in the Senate and should be in committee. I think it was assigned to committee. I'm not sure which one, but that's upcoming. So that's the second bill. Third bill that we have in place is an apiary bill. I spoke with leadership this past week. We hope to have that on the floor in the next week. This is a liability bill that limits liability to apiaries, to people that are beekeepers. There are frivolous lawsuits. Many times a beekeeper will have someone be stung by a bee, and they'll go after the beekeeper saying, well, it's your fault your bee stung me. First, you got to prove somehow that it was their bee, and most of these cases are thrown out, but not until after more than a few dollars are spent by some amateur or professional, in either case, beekeeper. So this law simply limits liability that if you're using best practices on how you manage your hive, if you pay the $5 annual registration fee to the state of Ohio, which is important so the state knows where all these hives are located. So when they're looking at colony collapse, when they're looking at mite infestation and other issues, that they have an idea of trends and tracking of what's going on, we need to know. And a lot of these are amateurs, so they're folks that may not even be aware of what the law might be. So that's a third bill that is currently headed towards the floor of the House. Hopefully, it was a bipartisan bill. All of my bills have been bipartisan in some form or fashion, either out of committee or off the floor. And this bill hopefully will be voted out of the House this next session. Probably not this week. There's no session this week, or this coming week. But then the next week. So that's three main bills. I have a couple other ones in play. I've got a migrant housing bill to help with some of the migrant farmers, try and be able to have a little more choice and ability to house migrants as they come in to the area for the summer work, which is important that we keep those folks' businesses alive and doing well. So that's another bill that is in play. And we are working diligently on a very elaborate bill that will be very involved. It'll be a heavy lift. It probably will not get introduced until next GA, involving advanced reactor technology, research and development of medical isotope production in the state of Ohio. And it will bring a whole new sector that we hope to bring to Ohio, to bring a lot of new high-tech, high-paid jobs to the state. And we've been working literally for the last year on creating a nuclear authority and a nuclear consortium to do this. We're just now finally got our head wrapped around a concept of how we can do this legally within the state's constitution. And we'll be happy to talk to you more about that as we finalize and solidify the actual legislation later this year. Other than that, again, I'll jump back to, because I say I got my 5-minute warning. I could go for 105, so I don't want to take up all the time today. But House Bill 512 is a bill that we haven't supported from the beginning. It was brought to leadership by the governor's office, and Bill Reineke, who is a member to our West, was the party that introduced this bill. I believe his interest he's very active in workforce development, and his angle is more to promote workforce development within the state, which is certainly an important area. However, taking away the responsibility and taking away the power from our local state school board members is not, in my opinion, the way to do it. Now, are there issues? I understand that our state school board members represent roughly 1 million people. That's a lot. For a non-paid, or I shouldn't say non-paid, I guess there is a small stipend paid for that position, but how do you represent 1 million people faithfully in a way to get your word out and let people know what you do? It's very difficult. And so I understand there are some issues regarding that. But in the end, I will tell you that a 2,400-page bill that is twice what our budget was is not the way to shove this through. Leadership apparently was given the role to push this through for the governor's office. It's in, it's not state and local government, I forget, which committee is it?
Accountability and oversight.
Oversight.
Yeah.
And if you look at that committee is stacked with leadership people, okay? And so the people that you can make the most inroads with is that group. The more you can bombard the leadership, the folks on that committee, and I believe they were listed in the email you sent out this morning, the more you can get a hold of those people to try and not even have that bill get out of committee. And unfortunately, I'm afraid that bill will vote out of committee, just based on how heavy the leadership side is involved. But at least if you can bombard them with emails, letters, phone calls, and they still vote it out of committee, it will be, and then your next step will be go to the members themselves and do the same thing. But first, let them be aware that there is a huge pushback on this bill. And working through those committees, those 12, 13 people first, start there and then move on. So I got 1 whole minute left, so I'm sorry, fortunately. So at this point, if anybody has a question of any sort, I'd be happy to try to address it. And if at some point you want me to come back another time and just speak with you, I'd be happy to. Go ahead.
On the cemetery.
Yes.
Grants
Mhm.
or funding from
Mhm.
the state. I am personally aware of what happens to cemetery funding in municipalities.
Okay.
As in, they collect funds from people who might purchase sites or burial,
Right.
whatever,
Mhm.
provisions. And they're supposed to keep that fund forever. That
Right,
was
goes into a
forever
trust.
fund, yes.
Mhm. Correct.
And they don't.
And
And
part,
so the audits
right,
don't really get into revealing whether that money is really there
then
or
it's
not.
gone. Right.
Yes, and I would say that there are an awful lot of cities that are taking that money and not funding.
I've been ding, something. So I'll answer this and then I'll
Will you
walk
be
away.
stay for the entire meeting
here,
and
yeah.
people
If
can ask
if you
you?
got extra time, I'll be happy. To answer your question, in addition to the funding for this grant, there is a lot. 2013, there was a panel put together on best practices on changes that should be made in cemetery law. While I talk mostly, because that's what the townships and everybody wants to hear about it, bringing funds back to their local government, this bill goes a long ways towards implementing policy procedural changes to address these issues, making these entities more transparent and having to provide information back to the state auditors to make sure that they're not absconding these funds. And it gets into pre-need trust, bonding, best practices for insurance. So it does address many of the issues you're referring to. But with that, I will be around afterwards. Thank you.